I kind of got away with Warcraft 3. My parents were rather strict with the kind of games that they would allow me to play as a kid, so when I managed to get my hands on a game that had stories of honor, duty, and glory, but also of betrayal, madness, and corruption, it was a dream come true. And when I finished the campaign, watching dumbfounded as the once noble hero I had led down the path of damnation sat triumphantly on his frozen throne, I understood that Warcraft was a different kind of story. But there was one thing that bugged me. In the penultimate chapter of the campaign, something was revealed in the depths of a lost underground kingdom.
The recent quakes have awakened dark things under the ice. Ancient, horrid things. What the hell are they?
They are the horrors the dwarves spoke of. They are the faceless ones.
Beings that had never been spoken of before, come from a place deep below, forgotten. As the story moved on from this, I was left with many questions. And when Blizzard announced a new, different game, I wondered if the answers awaited me in the lost and forgotten places of this familiar, brand new world. So, I began my search. This video is sponsored by World Anvil. An interesting thing about World of Warcraft is that, as an MMORPG, it does as much of its storytelling through its environment as it does through its non-player characters, quests, and dialogues. And so, the first time you encounter Silithids in the Barrens, you figure that they are, just another species of large and dangerous insects that want to have you for lunch. That is, until you venture further south and see them again, spilling out of the Rustmaul dig site, a failed dwarven mining expedition in the Shimmering Flats. And if you dare enter the tunnel, you'll find that the walls are lined with a carpet of flesh. Violet, wet flesh from which numerous bulbous eggs seem to grow out. You don't want to get involved with that, so onward you go to Tanaris, the largest desert in the western continent of Kalimdor. But something is off. Even from far away, you can see tall shapes poking out of the ground. As you approach, you see that the sand has been displaced by twitching living talons of cartilage and exoskeleton, and that the purple flesh now spills outward from the gaping chasm's underground tunnels. The same is true for the Noxious Lair to the west, another violet blot on the land from which Silithids spill out in numbers you have never seen before. You would have seen the same thing in the writhing deeps of Feralas, and in the slithering scar that cuts through Un'Goro Crater. But it is only when you climb the steep path out of the crater that you finally lay your eyes upon it. The unsettling thing about Silithus is that it is unequivocally a hive. The entire region's surface is a hostile desert crisscrossed with open wounds carved out by the colossal talons from the deep, and below it are endless tunnels weaving towards one same direction. In the far distance to the south, there is a great wall. The druids tell you that it was built long ago, to keep something in.
Death is close.
The Gates of Ahn'Qiraj was the first of its kind. A massive worldwide event where all players contributed in order to open the lost secrets of the ancient and forbidden realm hidden behind the Great Wall of Silithus. But once the wall fell, it should have been a rather predictable affair. The Silithids turned out to be the mindless army of a more intelligent insectoid race named the Qiraji. So logically, our heroes were meant to bring down the Qiraji emperors. But there was more to it. For a bit of context, as they group in large numbers and raid the fortresses of their enemies, players encounter and are expected to defeat particularly powerful foes after dealing with the chaff. And when you fight them, these bosses are usually screaming out taunts or threats. Something along the lines of, big bright red letters. See, in WoW when you write, the letters change in color. White is normal, red is screaming, orange is for description, etc, etc. What matters is that pink is for whispers, which you use when you want another player, and only that player, to see your message. True enough, as you enter Ahn'Qiraj and fight its own slew of screaming bosses, something whispers to you. With one small caveat, there are no pink letters at the bottom of the screen. You hear the whispers. I cannot stress how unique this was for the time. Anyone who found out firsthand that this happened did not know that it was random, meaning that it usually only happened to 1 or 2 players at a time. And given the difficulty of the raids, players commonly used voice chat to strategize. Can you imagine sitting back after a boss fight, closing your eyes for a second while everyone else takes a quick break, only to hear this?
Your friends will abandon you.
I imagine few things are more satisfying to a game designer than knowing something they put into the game had the exact effect that they intended. The whispers perfectly complemented the eerie and unsettling ambiance and music of the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, with its alien pulsating walls feeling like they wish to devour you. You think back on the words of the prophet you slew at the entrance.
Prepare for the return of the Ancient Ones.
And as you enter the throne room of the twin Qiraji Emperors only to find them bowing, you understand the meaning of those words. This time, orange text pops up. The massive floating eyeball in the center of the chamber turns its gaze towards you. You stand before a god. Cthulhu is unlike any enemy encountered in the game up to this point. Everything about this creature is alien, strange, and unsettling. It continually whispers horrible things to you, not to belittle your efforts or to boast proudly, but to get under your skin. Its words are cruel, existential poison, meant to make you doubt yourself and those around you, and to make you feel like you have overstepped in your heroism and are now facing something that is far beyond your ability. The combat was infamously difficult, to the point of being considered impossible until a patch changed the game and made it easier. Even after its demise, Cthulhu leaves the player with more questions than they had when they first heard the whispers. But there is an inkling of an answer. The prophet spoke of others. What would terrify you more in the dead of night? A scream or a whisper? All horror, I believe, exists somewhere between the scream and the whisper. Loud and intimidating danger that awakens our primal fight-and-flight response. And quiet, menacing suggestions that make us doubt our perception and reason. Forgotten dark gods are usually first known to us when we whisper their names out loud after discovering some forbidden codex. Which is why it's very convenient that in a stroke of genius, someone at Blizzard decided to put all of the lore that had once been in the Warcraft 3 manual into World of Warcraft. It is entitled History of Warcraft and can be found in several locations as a book that you can open and read through. The lore is extensive and goes into great detail on the many significant events that shaped the world of Azeroth. But surprisingly, it only has a couple of paragraphs about those known as the Old Gods, which are so sparse in information that you could sum up everything we knew to 3 things. There were 5 old gods, they fought against the titans who laid the foundations of this world, and they were defeated and imprisoned. Okay, by now it should be obvious that I love lore and world building, and we're lucky enough to have a sponsor that is all about that, World Anvil. Here's Tadol. It's my latest project, a land divided between its ancient elemental peoples, please don't sue me Blizzard, and the mortal orders that have come to settle this land over time. I have been using World Anvil to organize this world, which is very helpful because I also happen to be using it for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I'm running, making it very easy for my players to consult the various aspects of the lore without me flooding them with information. Using their new visual editor has also made it easier for me to change articles on the fly, which is great because I often change my mind about where every piece fits in the lore. If you love world building like I do, use our affiliate link to get a discount on World Anvil. I'm also going to share the link to my world in the description if you want to check it out and see what you can do once you get a membership. A huge thank you to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. As intriguing as the search for these forgotten gods is, we may have to put the books back on the shelf for now. We are adventurers after all, and real immediate threats linger beyond this world. The first expansion to World of Warcraft, The Burning Crusade, has players journey to the shattered homeworld of the Orcs, Draenor, also known as Outland. The name of the expansion is taken from its main antagonist, the Burning Legion, an army of demons that has ravaged the universe, seeking out life and snuffing it out without mercy at the command of the fallen titan Sargeras. They once used the orcs to try and destroy Azeroth, and have attempted to directly invade this world twice, and been repelled both times. But the Legion are nothing if not determined, and Outland serves them as a perfect forward base of operations. So our heroes have to free this land from their demonic enemies. It makes sense that most of the locations in this game are inspired from locations in the Warcraft games. But I had been to Outland before, and all I recalled was a desolate red rock desert. However, World of Warcraft allowed for the original vision to be expanded upon and greatly improved. This new realm was unlike anything players had encountered before, with gravity-defying geography, exotic and alien biomes, as well as fascinating new races with unique stories and quest lines to uncover. Among them are the Arakoa. As the last remnants of a dying race, many of these bird-like beings have often turned to dark magic. Their quests usually involve their own history and ancestral sorcery, but there is an exception. As you explore Shadowmoon Valley, you encounter an Arakoa named Parsha. He informs you that, in desperation, some of his kin once formed a dark conclave and called out to the void beyond the stars. He deserted them, and for good reason. They received an answer. While the conclave were killed before they could complete the ritual, even after death their spirits linger, aiming to fulfill their duty. Through various quests, you acquire the objects of power needed to stop the ritual, and predictably, the final quest expects you to do exactly that. However, as you interrupt the ritual, you manage to catch a glimpse of what the Arakoa sought to bring into the world, and two things strike you. The first is that, like all creatures in World of Warcraft, it has a model, and not a new model. In fact, the model is very similar to one you have seen before. The second is that, like all creatures in World of Warcraft, this one has a name. Summoned Old God.
We span the universe, as countless as the stars.
It is then that it becomes certain. Cthulhu was one of the Old Gods. And that means that there are 4 others still imprisoned somewhere deep within Azeroth. Wrath of the Lich King is considered by many to be the single greatest expansion in the game's history. Heroes travel to Northrend, seeking to defeat the most iconic antagonist of Warcraft, the Lich King Arthas, master of the Undead Scourge. It was around this time that I started actually playing the game, and Northrend had gotten the Outland treatment. The northernmost continent of Azeroth is a cold and dangerous realm. There are places of beauty, but the looming shadow of the Lich King's ramparts always lingers in the distance. The metal they are crafted from can be found all over Northrend, and it can be mined by players and made into armor. It is a valuable, strong metal, but it seems to have odd effects on people. One particularly rich vein of this mineral, found on Whisper Gulch, has driven an entire dwarven expedition insane. These dwarves really should stop mining. They even said they heard voices as they were mining for Serenite. That's the name of the metal, by the way, or at the very least the name that is most commonly used. But one of the rare friendly races in the continent, the Tuskarr, call it by a different name: the Black Blood of Yogg-Saron. As an aside, let me just gush about how happy I was to see the Tuskarr here. I made full use of Warcraft 3's extensive map editor tool as a boy. Every biome had a unique set of neutral mobs to fight, and the Tuskarr were a Frozen Throne original, and one of my favorites. Another one of the races to reappear were the Nerubians, but that was a foregone conclusion. The story of this spider-like race was intertwined with that of Arthas, as he was the fallen hero you had elevated to the throne in the conclusion of Warcraft 3. One of his many villainous accomplishments was the conquest of Ajal Nerub.
The Nerubians built an empire beneath the frozen wastes of Northrend, an empire that you so foolishly built your structures upon. My empire.
But the merit of this victory was not his alone. It is by talking to one of the remaining survivors of the Nerubians, Kilix the Unraveler, that you discover why they lost.
My people struggle against the forces of the undead. They dug deeper as they lost ground. They inadvertently exposed minions of the old gods known only as the Faceless. In the end, we could not fight a war on two fronts.
How thrilled I was to read these words, to return to the place where it had all begun. It finally felt like I would get my answers. Instead, yet again, all I found were more questions. As you venture deeper into the Lost Kingdom, you encounter servants of the old gods. Mortals who, like the Arakoa Dark Conclave, have willingly given their lives to the call of the Void. Their leader calls out a name you've heard before. Then it is time to face the Faceless. The herald of the old gods roars in an unintelligible, visceral screech. And yet, somehow, you understand. It whispers into your mind. As it dies, it leaves you with a cryptic message. As unsettling as they are, these words quickly leave your mind. After all, the Tuskarr and Nerubians are exceptions. Most of the other locals don't like you. The undead are an almost unavoidable foe, but there are others standing in your way, and for very clear reasons. The ruthless Vrykul are long-lost cousins of mankind, larger and stronger, and they have cast their lot in with the Lich King. The Blue Dragonflight is hellbent on committing mage genocide, Drukari trolls are as hostile as they are insane, and so are the Scarlet Crusade. The one secondary enemy that seems inscrutable to you are the Iron Dwarves. World of Warcraft has a particular philosophy with the antagonists of every expansion. Alongside a first and overwhelmingly present enemy usually exists a secondary main foe, who is present enough and active enough to merit closer observation. It is possible that they will be central to the narrative later into the expansion, and potentially even be revealed as the main antagonists. The Iron Dwarves are aggressively protective, and the elaborate structures they defend are a testament to how advanced and mighty their creators were. But something feels off. As you venture into the halls of Ulduar, a titanic fortress city crafted by the ancient civilization that created the Iron Dwarves, unimaginable secrets are revealed to you. In the Halls of Stone, an enigmatic archive tells you of an ancient war against an enemy that could not be destroyed, but merely contained.
In the early stages of its development cycle, Azeroth suffered infection by parasitic, necrophotic symbiotes. Designation: Old Gods.
And when you confront the leader of the Iron Dwarves in the Halls of Lightning, he invokes his true master's name.
Yogg-Saron shall be released! The Pantheon shall fall!
All the pieces click into place.
I am the lucid dream.
This is not just a fortress and a research facility. It's a prison, and the guards have been turned.
The monster in your nightmares.
Ulduar is considered one of the greatest raids of the game, and it is very unique in that, unlike most raids preceding it, the heroes are not fighting an evidently evil enemy. The music that plays as you enter is glorious and noble, and the protectors of Ulduar all look like they should not be the villains. In fact, they seem like a justified defense mechanism for something.
The fiend of
1,000 faces.
Destroying them feels oddly bittersweet, especially as you release their leaders, the Titan Keepers, benevolent jailers whose minds have been clouded by corruption. It makes you realize that those you slew on your way there could perhaps also have been saved. Still, who could fault them for their failure, given the prisoner they were entrusted with?
Cower before my true form! Bow down before the god of death!
Yogg-Saron's design is completely different from Cthulhu's. It is a nightmarish thing, likely to drive insane any who gaze upon it. Which is quite fitting, as its boss fight introduces a sanity mechanic where, if players fall below a certain threshold, they too succumb to the will of Yogg-Saron and become his minions. This mechanic is the ultimate culmination of the environmental storytelling you have seen so far. Although the Faceless serve him well, Yogg-Saron has many armies. All over Northrend, his black blood corrupts the land, poisons minds, and drives maddened mortals into his service. Fail here, and you will all suffer the same fate. The fight is only made more grave by the taunting whispers of the god and the visions of the past that it shares with the heroes. They have not been idle in their imprisonment. Time and time again, it seems the old gods have interfered with history, pervasively influencing mortals and pushing them towards the edge, sowing chaos and disarray in order to distract and divide, all in preparation for their inevitable return. So it is that, even as you defeat him, Yogg-Saron leaves you with a cryptic threat.
Your fate is sealed. The end of days is finally upon you, and all who inhabit this miserable little seedling. Ului Bisarak, Gargerong, Wish!
There are a few antagonist factions in World of Warcraft that can be found on every continent. Usually threats are localized in areas, and the missions in an area culminate in one final main quest to rid that place of the threat. Sometimes this threat extends to a region, and there will be several quest lines all converging towards one seat of evil power that needs to be extinguished, usually a raid or a dungeon. A perfect example of this is the iconic Black Rock Mountain, a base of operations of both the Dark Iron Dwarves and the Black Dragonflight, two factions that are regional threats. What's interesting, however, is that when you venture into their dungeons, you realize that these factions have allies of their own. More specifically, these guys. Meet the Twilight's Hammer, a cult of maniacs hell-bent on bringing about the apocalypse, which they call the Hour of Twilight. If you've played WoW, you've probably seen them before. In classic WoW, they could be found here, 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 and here, which for your reference is here, 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 and here. In later expansions, they can also be found here and here. Well, by now it's clear that, as a faction, these guys are rather dispersed. Hell, you can even find some of their agents in your own cities and accept quests from them. Though you may not necessarily know that they belong to the Hammer when you do, but oh well, gold is gold. Despite this wide presence, it is clear that they are never the main threat. Rather, they're usually either engaging in a discrete operation to awaken some evil power or latching on to some other mightier evil faction. Until the Cataclysm came. And this happened. 6 years after the original release of World of Warcraft, the developers felt that the visuals of the original world were in dire need of a facelift. But how to update the entire world in a way that seems natural and also allows for storytelling? Easy. You make good on Yogg-Saron's promise and unleash the end of days. In retrospect, Cataclysm was overly ambitious to its own detriment, but it was surprisingly successful in some respects. Old content had to be updated on a massive scale, all while new content had to be added for the expansion itself, because the world was under attack on all sides. The Naga, once highborn elves that were transformed into monstrous sea creatures when their continent was sunk into the ocean by the last great cataclysm, now wage war with blind devotion, following the mysterious agenda of their queen Azshara. Armies of Nuraki, the faceless servants of the old gods, now swarm the low places of the world, seeking out ancient artifacts of power and the release of their master's most powerful minions. This is not to mention that a war between the elemental lords rips the land apart. These mighty beings and their endless armies were once defeated and enslaved by the old gods, and some of them grew fond of their masters during service. Or, maybe they just want to see the world burn. Worst of all, Deathwing has returned. The Earth Warder, aspect of the Black Dragonflight, a once noble protector who was turned into a mad demigod of destruction, has now rallied all of his demented children to the service of his dark masters. And there is no line they won't cross in their attempts to corrupt the rest of their brethren. So yeah, Cataclysm was kind of nuts. Instead of having one continent, you were fighting lots of different enemy factions across a variety of battlefields and environments all over Azeroth. But connecting all of these cataclysmic pieces was one unifying enemy. Coming out of the shadows and into the stage of catastrophe, that's right, the Twilight's Hammer are here to finally put the end of days in motion, and they've brought out the big guns. But something isn't quite right. See, one thing I forgot to mention about the Twilight's Hammer clan is that they're usually kind of pathetic. Their leader is a guileless brute, their plans tend to fail, and they often end up acting like Saturday morning cartoon villains playing second fiddle to the actual antagonists they often latch onto. The Cataclysm is an all-out assault, so obviously the worldwide presence of the cult helps in coordinating their apocalyptic endeavors. But you know better by now, they are not really the ones pulling the strings. Something has laid out a plan so complete that even blundering mortals should be able to execute it. I had stopped playing WoW by the time Cataclysm released, but I still followed the lore through wikis, YouTube theory videos, and discussion forums. And there was a veritable depository of information on the old gods, painstakingly gathered through a sieve from all of the hints that were found within the game. We knew of and had defeated 2 of the old gods, which meant that we were on the lookout for the other 3. And when a name started being circulated, we all had our suspicions. There was a menacing presence in the shadows, always mentioned but never there. A name that echoed through the dark corners of the world. It is written in secret messages shared between cult members you are not supposed to see. It is in the dying words of Naga sea witches, in the back of every elemental's mind, and in the war cries of the Naraki legions that flood the surface. A corruption capable of driving a dragon aspect to madness. N'Zoth. Early on in the expansion, for most people, this name meant nothing. But as the hour of twilight approached, all players had come to know it. And when the heroes of Azeroth narrowly defeated Deathwing and prevented the end of the world, the fact that N'Zoth was nowhere to be seen was met with concern. Our triumph was merely a setback, and it was clear that we hadn't heard the last from him. What we did not know back then was that the God of the Deep was the weakest of his kind, and that we would soon be walking over the grave of the mightiest among them. When Mists of Pandaria was first announced, most players were upset with the news. It was a departure from the familiar, a new continent written into the map out of nowhere and featuring an aesthetic that seemed to clash with everything players had known so far. And it didn't help that the new race added to the game had merely been an Easter egg in the original Warcraft games. The Pandaren. I mean, look at them. They're so fluffy and wholesome. Surely their people are not about to have their homeland ruined by 2 warring factions, thus revealing the dark secrets their ancestors sealed away. I guess this may be as good a time as any to mention the factions of World of Warcraft. In the same way that the antagonists fly their banners, the heroes of this world have allegiances. In fact, one very unique thing about WoW is that from the very beginning of the game, by picking your race, you automatically belong to one of 2 factions. One is the Alliance, a gathering of like-minded peoples trying to hold on to the legacies of their ancestors and preserve their ways of life amidst a changing world. The other is the Horde, a motley coalition of drastically different peoples that have broken with tradition and are trying to carve out a place for themselves. Due to limited resources, disputed land ownership, and differing ideals, as well as old and new grudges between their members, these 2 factions have been in constant conflict from the inception of the game, ranging from border scuffles to all-out wars. The rivalry between these 2 factions was the perfect excuse for the game to have player versus player combat. This is mostly experienced in battlegrounds, which are meant to represent conflict in tense border areas and can pitch up to 80 players against each other in competitive games of capture the flag, resource races, or even full-on sieges. Beyond that, players can also opt into PvP mode or fully PvP servers, meaning that the world map itself has objectives that can be disputed, and players may be attacked by members of the opposing faction without warning at any time. The more egregious example of this are invasions, where large numbers of players amass and attack the capital cities of their enemies. Hey, it's called Warcraft for good reason. In any case, the Cataclysm certainly did not help ease these tensions, and even if these 2 factions can set their differences aside in the time of need, as soon as their common enemy is defeated, their conflict resumes. And sometimes they don't even wait for the bad guy to be defeated to start going at each other again. This is why throughout every expansion you can also find other factions, third parties unconcerned with this conflict and that have goals of their own. Some, like the Twilight's Hammer, are enemies to all, but others can be befriended. By completing quests, gathering materials, and slaying specific enemies, Players can earn reputation with these factions, which in turn gives them access to unique rewards, as well as new quests that can reveal entire storylines and offer a new perspective on the world. In this sense, Mists of Pandaria was very unique. It was the first game that did not have a major antagonist from the get-go, instead focusing on the Horde-Alliance war and how it affected the continent of Pandaria by pressuring its inhabitants to pick a side. This proved to be a clever way to ask the players to look at this conflict and begin to question whether perhaps they were the villains of the story for bringing war to a peaceful land. This is exemplified by the Pandaren, the new race added to the game and the first neutral race to exist in World of Warcraft, meaning you can pick which side you're going to fight for, but also that this is the first people to be divided by the war. But that's not fun. Let's go kill each other. So you go about your business as usual, waging war against your rivals while also trying to help the people of this land against the horrors you have carelessly unleashed. Because there are dark beings buried within this land, and war has awakened them. The Seven Sha are embodiments of negative emotions that thrive during war. The fight against them is also a fight against the worst impulses of the Alliance and the Horde, and this responsibility to defeat them is both literal and figurative. It is very simple visual storytelling, but it works. Being witness to the malice of these creatures makes it seem like your main concern is to put the genie back in the bottle and stop the war from escalating. Until you see the wall. The Pandaren tell you that it was built long ago. To keep something in. The Mantid are an expansionist and ferocious, insect-like race that awakens every 100 years to assault Pandaria. The Serpent Spine Wall was built to keep them at bay, but this time they have awakened early. After holding them back at the wall, you cross into their homeland to discover that their empress has been corrupted by one of the Sha, and is driving her own people to extinction on its whims. You make a hesitant alliance with the Klaxi, a faction of Mantid elders who wish for the natural cycle to be restored. To do this, they send you on quests to awaken their paragons, dormant Mantid champions of the past who were encased in amber. In World of Warcraft, endgame factions like the Klaxi are often equal parts beloved and infamous because of how much time you need to dedicate to them in order to earn their trust and gain access to their rewards. Usually these groups are the closest to quote-unquote good factions you will encounter in the game, as their one and only goal is often to stop a greater evil without concerning themselves with the bickering of the Alliance and the Horde. As you increase your reputation with the Klaxi, they give you their aid in the war against their corrupted kin, offering you increasingly better equipment, enhancing your powers while you are in their homeland, and slowly shedding their distrust for you. By the time you finally slay the Empress, freeing the Mantid of the Sha and ending the premature invasion, the many paragons of the Klaxi and their eccentric personalities have won you over. Kilrook the Wind Reaver, the first paragon you awakened, has become a particularly trustworthy ally and seems to respect you. So you continue increasing your reputation with them, knowing that once you reach Exalted, the highest level, there may be a unique item or quest available to you. And true enough, there is one. But it's not what you expected.
Wakener, your deeds have earned you the trust of the Klaxi. You are to be rewarded. Walk with me. We Mantid are an elder race. Before your history began, our empire was vast. We shared this world with our sister kingdoms, Ankiraj and Ajol Nerub. Our gods were many and powerful. We Mantid worshipped the 7 heads of Yasharaj. Great was the Old One, and terrible was his wrath. He consumed hope and begat despair. He inhaled courage and breathed fear. When the usurpers came, the ones you call Titans, Yasharaj was destroyed. His last terrible breath has haunted this land ever since, but the shadows he left behind are mere whispers of his former glory. Your gods are not your gods, outsider. I tell you now because you have earned this warning. If the Old Ones ever return, we Mantid will once again stand by their side. The wisest among you will do the same.
Kilrook makes good on his promise. When Garrosh Hellscream, the power-hungry war chief of the Horde, becomes consumed by pride and attempts to resurrect Y'Shaarj, hoping to use its power to win the war, the Klaxxi Paragons stand guard at his antechamber. It is a bitter reversal, but one that you should have seen coming. The warning was clear. Even after triumphing over them all and marching on to stop the final boss, you are left bothered by Kilrook's unsettling last words.
Well, fuck, Awakener. We will meet again.
Past those doors awaits the beating heart of a dead god, thrumming with anticipation at the possibility of return. Y'Shaarj is only ever heard, but his voice embodies all that the Shah were, and more.
Embrace your rage. Caress your fear. Gorge your hatred. Voice your doubts.
It has found a perfect puppet in Garrosh. As you fight against him, Y'Shaarj harangues you. It is the voice of a predator, of a thing that is used to consuming others effortlessly, dripping with pride and contempt. It has done this before. What should have been clear from the start becomes evident to you. There is only one true war, and the Horde and Alliance are not dictating its pace. They are merely the latest puppets wielded by powers that, for time immemorial, have refused to share their bounty with one another. In the end, only one of them was ever going to win. Warlords of Draenor, the 5th expansion of World of Warcraft, is set in a parallel universe 30 years in the past. If this seems a bit jarring, I think you can empathize with how everyone felt when the expansion was first announced. Counterintuitively, what disconnects it from the others is neither the time travel nor the alternate universe, but rather the fact that it is an adventure featuring iconic WoW characters trapped in another world, which means that Azeroth has been left behind. And unlike the Burning Crusade, this world offers little in terms of meaningful clues in the search for answers. So instead, I'd like to talk about mystery boxes. Mystery box storytelling revolves around the idea of plots and subplots that are interconnected in a way that is not always evident to the viewer. Interestingly, one could say that video games were early adopters of mystery box storytelling, mainly because a narrative heavily centered on puzzle solving can effortlessly become a part of a game's design. In the context of WoW, however, the main narrative was always relatively straightforward, with some level of intrigue but nothing too opaque when it came to the central topic of the expansion, and they certainly did not make the gameplay be centered around puzzles. There is a main antagonist, and the story is about defeating them. There are of course always some mysteries to be unveiled, but they are rarely dictating the pace of the main narrative. Any good mystery needs a little room to breathe, and horror in particular needs moments of quiet where the tension releases, in order to ease the audience into a false sense of security. World of Warcraft would often alternate narratives involving the old gods with other narratives that allowed us to put them in the back of our mind. This was very effective because it is in the back of our mind that they thrived. For this reason, I think that the old gods were generally considered to be the greatest mystery box of World of Warcraft. Until this came out. In 2016, Blizzard started releasing a series of books called Warcraft Chronicles. The series was designed as a centerpiece for the lore of the Warcraft universe, clarifying what we already knew but also providing new information. And in the first issue, we received a very important piece of lore, a cosmology chart. In video games, usually it's not uncommon for not only the story but for the greater lore of the universe to be presented to players in a mystery box format, especially for fantasy and sci-fi. It is an essential part in making the universe feel like a place that needs to be discovered. Who created everything? What are the major powers in opposition here? World of Warcraft's cosmology chart presented us with the forces of magic that rule its universe, and if you look closely, you will find something familiar. There they are. Okay, in order for everything to make sense, I'm going to try and give you a quick summary of what we knew about the cosmos by that point. This is going to be heavy lore, so if you already know this stuff, you can skip to this part. It's not clear who created the universe, but the Titans put order in it. These colossal beings were born from rare planets that possessed souls, and as such they naturally became protectors of worlds. As they traversed the cosmos, searching for others like them, they fostered life wherever they found it, turning chaotic and dangerous planets into habitable places where life could grow, and in turn allow for a potential dreaming Titan soul within it to eventually awaken. But the Titans were not the only power affecting the universe. For example, opposed to the life that they fostered was death, and these two forces had their own respective spiritual realms that existed overlapped with reality, ruled by their own sets of gods. Opposed to the order incarnated by the Titans was disorder, embodied by the demons of the mercurial realm between realms called the Twisting Nether. The Titans soon learned that fighting demons was an inevitable part of their mission to safekeep worlds, and entrusted this task to Sargeras, the noblest among them. Little did they know that in time, the harrowing things he would see during his vigil would lead to his fall and turn him into their greatest enemy. But before life and death, order and disorder, there had been light and shadow. These two primordial forces were shut out from reality, able to only indirectly influence it from the outside. Essentially, light and shadow need to possess hosts in order to manifest in reality. For instance, priests in WoW can channel both of these energies, but when they do, they are merely borrowing these powers. There are beings that are inherently designed to be the weapons of these great forces as they wage their eternal war for control over reality. The way the light does this is through the Naaru, energy beings infused with pure light, designed to purify corruption and to convert intelligent life to service through dogmatic faith in the holy light. It stands to reason that if light purifies, then darkness corrupts. And the way that the Shadow of the Void does this is through parasitic necrophotic symbiotes that embed themselves into planets to corrupt everything within them, and eventually bring them out of reality into the void. World parasites with which we had become intimately familiar by this point. Following the release of this information, it became clear to the fans that the strings tying shut the Old God mystery box were slowly becoming untangled, only to reveal a larger mystery box which encompassed the entire cosmos of this universe. Still, there were many questions left unanswered, and the developers seemed to be in no rush to unveil them just yet. The Old Gods would continue to weave in and out of the shadows, leaving us keepsakes to remember them by during these lulls in their presence. After you defeat Garrosh in Mists of Pandaria, you can claim his malevolent weapon, Xalataw. It speaks with the voice of a dead god, and it whispers mad, cruel, sweet words to you. It's not the first item you have encountered that is like this. During the Cataclysm, you found a curious object in an archaeological dig site. Its name bides you not to meddle with it, but your curiosity is too strong. As you play around with the configuration, it also whispers to you cryptic words.
At the bottom of the ocean, even light must die.
The puzzle box of Yogg-Saron is probably one of the most investigated items in the history of WoW. Every time you used the box, it could utter a different whisper. These were all carefully cataloged until players had a comprehensive list of all possible secrets held by the box, and then launched themselves in a mad quest to try and interpret them. I like to think that the puzzle box was the embodiment of the mystery that players sought to solve together, and in a way the avatar for the puzzle box of the Old Gods itself. And for a long time, items like it were the priceless and only source of answers that we would get. In retrospect, they pale in comparison to the revelations that we would soon be given. The devious words of a dagger and the prophecies from the heart of a nightmare. Let's agree that if an expansion is named Legion, it's not hard to guess what it's going to be about. Another demonic invasion looms on the horizon, and Azeroth must once again unite against a common foe, and awaken ancient powers to hold the enemy at bay. During this expansion, players journey to discover ancient artifacts, weapons of great might that will be essential in stopping the Legion. In WoW, items have a rarity, which signifies how valuable and useful they are. Common, uncommon, rare, and epic. But some items are more than epic. Their quality, the difficulty of acquiring them, and the power you wield once you have them makes them legendary. What made Legion different was that players were able to acquire iconic weapons from the franchise, such as the Doomhammer, the Ashbringer, and the Silver Hand. Some of the legendary weapons, however, were new. Those playing as Shadow Priests in particular can claim a mysterious weapon never mentioned before, the dagger Xalatath, Blade of the Black Empire. Like Xalata and the puzzle box of Yogg-Saron, this item speaks to you. But players had never possessed an item like Xalatath before. Screw the other classes, I guess. For starters, she has a charming personality, playful and sardonic, scornful but endearing. Unlike the threats and maddening whispers you have heard until now, her voice gently stirs curiosity in you. Xalatath is also quite the talker. She encourages you to slay certain enemies and comments on the areas you visit or non-player characters you encounter. Do be warned, following all of her advice can sometimes have less than ideal consequences.
My mistake. It seems the upstart goddess still holds sway here. Oh well.
But the most interesting thing about Xalatath is that she is not shy about her knowledge. She knowingly mocks the Legion's forces, has an open disdain for the works of the Titans, and often mentions the old gods in passing, as if they were old acquaintances. It becomes clear that the dagger knows far more than you can possibly imagine. Not only that, she is musing events, and it almost seems like she has her own plans. Just as you are using her, she is using you. But these concerns can wait. What is evidently clear is that she shares your goal of stopping the Legion, and is more than happy to lend you her power against them. Before taking on the Legion, however, the heroes of Azeroth need to deal with the weakness of their world that has long been exploitable. It is said that the world of Azeroth sleeps. In its slumber, it dreams. A dream of forests, of life, of potential. The Emerald Dream is a mysterious place mentioned from the early days of the game, usually only ever glimpsed in rare quests meant for druids. It's the spiritual realm, a locus of the life and death cycle of the world. These guardians of the wild understand that the natural life of Azeroth is tied to the purity of the dream, and that their duty is to keep it unblemished. It is why, time and time again, alongside the forces of nature, these druids have fought against corruption. But they have not always been successful. Dark whispers have seeped into the placid song of the dream, a seedling that hungrily grew into something different. A nightmare. After years of speculation, the first raid of the expansion sees players finally venture into the Emerald Nightmare, a place that had long been rumored to be one of the old gods' bastions. In order to stop it from overtaking the dream, heroes fight to cleanse the sanctums of life within it, and eventually they reach the heart of corruption.
Your coming was foretold in the rings. The long circle is nearly complete.
Il'gynoth is a parasitic behemoth, a servant of the old gods and the heart of the nightmare's corruption. It is my favorite boss in all of World of Warcraft. While the fight is interesting, it's his prophetic whispers and mellow, soothing voice that made him unique to me, and a source of fascination to many players.
The flame they seek will light the Master's way.
Unlike Xalatath, he does not give us answers, but rather prophecies, some of which took several expansions to come true, and others that have yet to be realized. It is unlikely that any boss's quotes in the history of the game have been as widely debated and interpreted as Il'gynoth's. What do his words mean? And who are they about? You become so obsessed with deciphering them that you do not stop to consider that maybe their intent was to sow doubt and mistrust. But the words were so soft-spoken, almost kind. Corruption is never unpleasant. It takes hold of you discreetly, little by little, every indulgence slowly pulling you closer to the edge until you have been so twisted by it that the abyss does not seem all that bad. Il'gynoth embodies the idea that the old gods have always wormed their way into the hearts of others with the promises of better things, and found it easy to convince those who have become weary of struggling for some fruitless cause. Why fight for what is right when you can simply accept a gift that will solve all of your problems? The Burning Legion's assault on your world always felt wanton, relentlessly cruel, with life referred to as a vile corruption that needed to be extinguished by fire. They are a screaming roar, a terrifying power of destruction that all but erased life from the universe. But perhaps they know of what is trapped deep within your world, and of how close to falling to its corruption Azeroth has come time and time again. Perhaps their crusade is meant to remove the chance of that ever happening, because Sargeras saw what happens when a world with a sleeping titan soul is corrupted by the void. Perhaps the screams fear the whispers. You do eventually defeat Il'gynoth, and his parting words leave you with no doubt.
N'Zoth, I journey to Ny'alotha.
The drowned god is once more on the move. He stirs within the sleeping city. As you step into the now-cleansed dream, you find a small flower, a remnant of the void. As Legion continues, the focus understandably shifts away from the old gods. But they are still there, as always, in the back of your mind. And amidst the many whispers of Xal'atath, one in particular stays with you. She said something when you saw that flower. The only words she ever said without an ounce of mirth, irony, or cunning.
Almost completely gone, as if it never existed. But the rift is deep and vast, and somewhere down there it stirs. Something has changed. The last prison weakens. We must prepare.
Battle for Azeroth sets an interesting stage. The Legion's defeat came at a high price. The last-ditch attack of Sargeras wounded the world, and the life essence that seeps out from it is a valuable resource. To try and mend this wound, you are entrusted with an object of great power, the Heart of Azeroth, an artifact which can collect this essence and return it to the world. But this may prove difficult. Like clockwork, the demise of a common enemy has allowed the Alliance and the Horde to resume hostilities against each other. And by the start of the expansion, these have escalated into an all-out war. Like Mists of Pandaria, faction warfare is the theme of the expansion. Speaking of themes, the opening theme of World of Warcraft is the most iconic piece of music ever composed for the game. And every couple of years there is a new rendition that aims to embody the vibe of the expansion. And yet, in an expansion that is clearly focused around this conflict, something is not quite right with certain parts of the theme. And this extends to the rest of the game's soundtrack. A leitmotif is a melodic phrase or figure that accompanies the reappearance of an idea in a story. They are usually used in a way to generate anticipation for a character before they even enter the screen or to magnify their presence once they arrive. But my favorite use of the leitmotif is in the absence of the character. And there is one leitmotif that any WoW player can recognize in an instant. You know who stands to gain the most from such a war. As both factions seek to secure new allies with powerful fleets to battle in the high seas, we encounter clear signs of the dangers to come. In the island of Zandalar, the Blood Trolls of Nazmir plot to unleash their god. And as you try to stop them in the halls of Uldir, another Titan facility, you hear the haunting flute. A forgotten and misbegotten old god, G'huun is but an infant, a barely congruent monstrosity that was never meant to be. It did not take part in any wars, locked away from birth in this facility as it is. It seems that the Titans went too far in their experimentation, and in so doing, created what they once fought so hard to destroy. An uneasy feeling comes over you as you correct their mistake and end G'huun before it can grow. You hear the flutes again, at a later time. In the island of Kul Tiras, the Tide Sages of Stormsong Valley have cast their lot with Azshara and her Naga. As you venture into the depths of their shrine, you encounter clear signs that an old enemy is once more on the move. Still, the war rages on. Blinded by their rivalry and deaf to the warnings of calmer minds, Alliance and Horde take turns wounding each other. But when the conflict between factions is at its apex, Azshara pulls the seas apart and boldly taunts them both into their kingdom of Nazjatar. As you have done many times before, you raid the enemy's palace and finally confront the Naga Queen in what is clearly a titanic structure of some sort. Only too late is it revealed that you have played into the hands of your enemy, and in using the Heart of Azeroth to defeat her, you have instead brought the key needed to open the last prison. The world shakes as a god surfaces for the first time in eons. N'Zoth is free, and you are to blame. It's perfect, really. The other old gods all tried to escape, and you stopped them just before they succeeded. In believing that N'Zoth had the means to do the same, you were tricked into giving him the keys. Whispers turn into screams as the god of the deep slowly drags the world into Ny'alotha. You steel yourself, gather your allies, and journey into his dark realm in a desperate attempt to stop the inevitable. It sounds great, right? It has all been leading up to this moment. But now comes the hardest part of the video. Because I have to do to you what was done to me. I have to ruin everything. This is the actual cinematic that they used. You single-handedly kill N'Zoth using the power of the Heart of Azeroth, the very MacGuffin that allowed him to break free. This cinematic got so many dislikes that Blizzard took it down. But honestly, I don't know why we were surprised. There is a problem with this world that has suddenly been growing beyond everyone's notice, even more pervasive than the old gods. You. A bit of a disclaimer. I could sit here and complain about the fact that, in Battle for Azeroth, a decision was made to spill out the contents of the existing mystery box to make room for the new mysteries. I mentioned the leitmotif, but really the approach to the old gods in this expansion is anything but subtle. I mean, out of 5 raids, 4 are old god related. The problem was that the narrative constantly pretends like this has not been noticed by the warring factions, the main characters, and the players. It's one thing to do it discreetly, like Mists of Pandaria did, and it's another to do it openly, like Cataclysm did. Battle for Azeroth chooses a middle ground between these two that simply does not work. But this video is not about criticizing writing decisions. It's not the fact that the mystery of the old gods was solved that ruined it all. I think that the mystery box was fated to have its content spilled because ultimately this is a game. We are supposed to beat the bad guys in the end. The issue here is something else entirely. I know that it has been a while, but do you remember the first thing that I said about this game? World of Warcraft is a multiplayer game. I started this video talking about the experience of doing raids together, and for every expansion that I have mentioned, triumph is achieved together. You are one of the many champions of Azeroth, and you have saved the world time and time again alongside other brave heroes like you. Over time, however, more and more focus was placed on your character specifically. As the expansions progressed, the narrative seemed more and more determined to say that you, and you alone, are the hero of this world. And this eventually proved to be a great misunderstanding of what the story was about. Yes, maybe you traveled alone, or you did quests alone. You might have gathered resources or farmed reputation alone. You certainly listened to the whispers alone. The old gods have, time and time again, told you how alone you are in your efforts against them. That you cannot trust those around you, that they will fail you, betray you. You have seen so many characters fall or be corrupted by them. It's not hard to believe these words. And yet, despite all of that, you and your fellow adventurers carried on forward. Together. You defeated Cthulhu, you beat Yogg-Saron, and you put Y'Shaarj down for good. It wasn't some magic MacGuffin that did it, and it certainly wasn't your Mary Sue character doing it alone. Rather, it was a gaggle of morons screaming and running around, somehow saving the world. No lore-accurate cinematic will give you the satisfaction that you would otherwise get from seeing that big nasty monster crumple into nothing with only a handful of raid members left standing. The quest to uncover the secrets of the old gods was not done by lone individuals. It was a collective effort to sate their curiosity using each other's imagination. Forums buzzing with excitement at every revelation, YouTube theory videos proving and disproving every theory. People sitting on a call, trying to figure it out. The Old Gods are the quintessential villains of World of Warcraft, not only because they grew alongside this game and its story, but because they embody an idea that is antithetical to this game. That you will all be alone in the end. Turns out, you won't. Despite the whispers that told us otherwise, we stuck together. We've beaten the odds together for 20 years now, and we'll keep on doing it. 2 expansions came and went without much fuss, and then they dropped the bomb. The Old Gods are dead. Even now, I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around it. This mystery compelled us greatly, and to see it ended in such a clumsy way is a tough pill to swallow. But I hope that, if anything, this video can stand as proof that, for a good long while, the Old Gods were not only one of the best things about WoW, but one of the greatest mystery boxes ever put together. Besides, who can say what the future holds? I heard that a certain dagger seems to have found her way back into the game in this latest expansion. And if you listen to her theme, you may notice a familiar sound.